What's up with y'all? It's Top Media TV coming back at y'all once again with another episode. In this video, we gonna profile George Williams, aka G. Some of y'all know him as Monkey Man, but his moniker is actually G or George, who's infamously known for wiping out Suge's whole inner circle, including Mob James's brother Buntry. Y'all know Mob James get on interviews and he starts to cry when he talks about his brother's death at the hands of this dude right here, George Williams. So we gonna get right into it, y'all. So not much information is known about George in his younger years, except that he was, from the Ludus Park, Piru area on the east side of Compton. This is a picture of George in the 1970s. I think he was in junior high school at the time. He could have been 14 or 15 years old. This is a rare photo of George at a young age. George Williams, who was a Ludus Park Piru, the Ludus Park being very close to the Mob Piru where Suge Knight was affiliated with. He would be hired by Suge Knight, and he'll be introduced to Suge Knight as being a hitter from the Ludus Park area, and Suge Knight would immediately hire him to join Death Row. This is a picture with Suge and G, and his infamous legendary status would start with the murder of Heron, who was also from the same neighborhood as George Williams, and they was homies. And from then on, it would just lead to more deaths allegedly committed by G. Reggie Wright, who was actually a Compton former police officer, would label G as a hitman and the number one most reputable gangster from Compton.
Reggie, who are some of the guys that you've crossed paths with?
I'll say on the red and blue side.
Who are some of the most reputable street guys that you have ran across?
And I'm just going to mainly speak on Compton because I don't know too many of the LA guys, only by reputation. But that I ran into personally, George Williams was one. I mean, that's the one I said would maybe offend.
From where?
From looters. James.
So whatever George did, lead you to believe that
we're not going to sit up here and build George up like he was.
No, he
was a hitman. He was a hitman. The one that he was tight with.
If you go at the one, you got to go at all of them. And if you go at the one, you got to go at all of them. No losing.
As y'all heard Reggie say that George Williams was a hitman and that he was a one of the top dogs in the Piru area for being a hitter. This is the LA Times article, and Bobby Ladd, who was a Compton cop, would also describe Heron's death. He would say, when Heron went down, we were all like, whoa, what's going on here? Until that moment, nobody ever had the nerve to take out anyone in Suge's inner circle. This was no ordinary murder. Someone was sending a message. That someone was none other than George Williams, aka G, or also known as Monkey Man to a lot of people. He was the one that was sending the message, and this was after he had refused to return a death row call, and Heron allegedly had shot him in the ass. And that's when George went to, target Heron. Crazy enough, they was both from the same hood, from Ludus Park, Piru, but that didn't matter to George as he was violated and he needed retaliation.
He represented the penitentiary like the kings do. And he just didn't deserve to die the way he died. He was shot 20-some times at a stoplight in the neighborhood in Compton. And man, he shouldn't have went out.
After Heron was murdered, George Williams, aka G, would team up with Lil Rod, picture right here, and they would, as they both didn't like death row, and it would be them two that would, shoot up all the Pirus around death row. Lil Rod being the money man, so he would fund anything that needed to be funded, and George would actually get under Lil Rod's wing because Lil Rod was a big time dope dealer who actually would serve life in prison, currently doing life for distributing a whole lot of PCP around California in the kilograms. George Williams, aka G, would also play a role in the murder of Brim Dave, aka David Brim. And he was the dude who was actually murdered in front of Mob James's house. It was rumored that Brim Dave actually kidnapped Vincent Buchanan in Fruittown, Piru, dressed in police clothing along with Poochie, and that he was tortured and murdered at Compton graveyard, shot in the head. And this would also lead to the murder of Buntry as he was playing a videotape allegedly at his house.
1609, he's killing. And he was coming to pretty much let my brother know that these guys got a hit on him. And somebody went back and told them that little Dave was our like family to us, which they didn't know. Nobody knew Dave knew our family. These guys sat and waited until he walked out the house with him and his girl car. They pulled up, got out, and sprayed him with an AK. I think little Davey was shot 23 times. But well, they actually had 2 AKs. Yeah. And they shot him up with 2 AKs.
Shooter shot Dave. Yeah. In a van. Doors open. If y'all know anything about a guy that loves with the MO of having a van and shooting up people with an AK, then you'll know who's responsible for that. Who's responsible for that. We all know who it is.
So as y'all heard Reggie Rice saying that he most likely knew that it was George Williams who was doing all these hits. He was going for the overkill, as y'all heard him before say Heron was shot 20-something times, and now Brim Dave also was shot 20-something times, allegedly by George. An altercation had happened between Suge Knight and the projects of the Bounty Hunters and Rat Dog. Between Rat Dog and Suge Knight, it was said that Suge Knight was threatened and cornered in a bathroom for publishing or a record deal, which Rat Dog had wanted. This is Rat Dog pictured, and Muhammad Ali to his right, who had visited the Nickerson Garden projects, the Bounty Hunters. Of course, Rat Dog was murdered, and that George was also responsible for this homicide. Suge Knight had felt threatened by Rat, so he had sent Poochie and George allegedly to commit this homicide, and Rat Dog would be murdered.
Murder of an individual named William Ratcliffe, who was a bounty hunter in the Nickerson Gardens housing project, who had threatened Suge. William Ratcliffe was run to ground on the streets of Compton and executed.
Bounty hunter said, "No, I got him. I need to holler at this guy. It's business."
Where's Bounty Hunter right at now? Oh, okay. Rest in peace.
Yeah. All right. See, you shouldn't even did that. You shouldn't even did that.
George's ultimate target would be Suge Knight, but he couldn't get to him. I guess Suge Knight was living in the hills at the time. He had a lot of money. He was out of prison after 2001. So before that time, Suge was in prison, so he couldn't be targeted. But George would actually target Suge Knight. In the LA Times article, Fred Reynolds, a Compton gang investigator with the Sheriff's County after Compton was disbanded, had also spoke and said, "If I was Suge Knight, I'd be worried someone was out to get me. When so many people so close to you get killed, it's no coincidence. If I was in his shoes, I'd be looking over my shoulder everywhere I went." Suge Knight had dismissed this and said, "I don't believe anyone is hunting me. But even if they were, so what? The only guarantee a man has in life is that you are born to die. I'm from the ghetto where black men get killed every day. It's like Jesus. Anyone who reads the Bible knows Jesus was no punk. He didn't hide from nobody. The threat of danger didn't stop him from doing what he had to do. That's how it is with me too. I fear no man, only God." I fear no man. Things would take a turn for the worse as Mob James's brother Buntry would be murdered after intel would reach George and Lil Rod that Buntry was out in front of his house hanging, watching the tape. And that's when George Williams had pulled up along with 2 others, and they had gunned Buntry down at a gas station after they was given intel by Lip Dog, who was playing both sides of the fence. And this murder would result in the split between the Pirus and the Ludus Park, where so many homicides would happen later on. And to this day, with the younger generation, so many homicides would take place between the two with no signs of peace treaty. At the result of the murder of Buntry, James's brother.
Growing up and said, because we was having a conversation in there about everybody getting killed and about the guys that was killed before right there. There was one particular cat at our house while we were playing chess and drinking our coffee. Lip Dog. He's sitting here. The comment came up that they had a picture of V being killed, and that Buntry, so-called himself, supposed to have it. So that in particular, that person went and took it upon himself to go tell those cats they got a picture. Buntry got a video of
VHS tape.
Yeah, of Vincent being killed.
So Lip Dog, who was a Mar Piru himself, would give the drop to George and Lil Rod. And that's when they would pull up and they would execute Buntry in a gas station in Compton and would execute him. George Williams, aka G, a year later after Buntry's death in 2003, would be arrested, and by 2005 he was convicted and sentenced to life for a PCP case. LA Times article would headline Knight ex-bodyguard convicted in PCP case. So he used to be very close to Suge Knight, of course, before he turned on him over refusing to turn over a death row car, and he would be violated, of course, by Heron by getting shot, and that's what would make him go on a killing spree, targeting everybody that was at death row. And he was sentenced to life along with Lil Rod. However, George Williams, who was serving life in the feds, would be released last year. And this is a fresh picture of G, aka George Williams, aka Monkey Man. And this is a late picture of him early this year on Instagram. And he does not want nobody to speak on him. He's keeping a low profile. I doubt he want to do any interviews. He actually even put word out there to stop Reggie Wright Jr. from mentioning his name on interviews, and Reggie actually would speak on this. Reggie also spoke on a situation where George had actually pulled up behind Reggie one time, where he thought that Reggie was actually somebody that was working for death row, a Piru, and he was getting ready to, do what he do. He was getting ready to kill that dude, whoever was in the car. He found out that it was Reggie when he exited the car and he went back in his car, and Reggie would speak on this.
God, George told me to keep his name. He sent word to Cynthia and Nunn to tell me to keep his name out of his mouth.
That was the last time I saw George in person. He was riding down Compton Boulevard, and I was riding down Compton Boulevard. And I had a Chevy Tahoe that had one-stop plates on it. And he saw the one-stop plates on it. And he thought and that's when he was mad at guys that was working at death row because of something that had happened. And he followed me, and I kind of saw it because I knew his green Cadillac with a black top. I knew that car. And I was like, oh, that's that nigga G, because I always was like, shit, that nigga, because he's with it. And he chased me and followed me. Well, I thought I was getting away, but he pulled up on me. I ran into a dead end down the alley. And he pulled up, but by that time I was like, oh, well, it's about to go down. And he jumped out. He was like, oh, little Rich, I didn't know that was you. Jumped in the car and drove back down the alley.
So that was Reggie Wright explaining how George had thought that Reggie was working for death row. He had thought he was somebody else, and that he immediately went behind him in the alley getting ready to execute him. But when he found out it was Lil Reggie, he gave him a pass. I mean, this dude seemed like he was a notorious dude, y'all. He was airing dudes out, shooting up dudes 20 plus times with AK-47s, targeting everybody that was working at death row. And he seemed to be pretty successful, y'all, as nobody had attacked him except Heron. But that was when Heron was in close proximity to G, and G, had to retaliate and do what he had to do. But let me know what y'all think, man. That was the story of George, aka Monkey Man, aka G. A lot of people don't want to speak about him because he don't like nobody to speak on his name. Y'all heard Reggie say George told him through Cynthia Nunn, who was a female OG Piru from Lewis Park, told her to tell Reggie to not speak on his name. So I can understand. He just come out of doing life from the feds. But that was the story of G, y'all, in a nutshell. Let me know what y'all think, man. Thanks for tuning in, man. Make sure y'all don't forget to like, subscribe, comment below, y'all. Peace.